Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about user management, specifically going to be in the framework of protecting your customer data. First off, we're going to go ahead and ask the all-important question, why should you care about user management? And I think there are a couple different answers. First of all, we have kind of the simple answer. Every single one of you has a company that has a different organizational structure. And so you're going to want your CRM to be able to mirror that because you have your reporting structures where people report to different people. You may have different assignment rules so that people are being assigned different things, and maybe even approval processes that you need to be reflected in the CRM. But I also think that, especially today, data security and customer privacy are more important than ever before. It feels like every week or so I hear about another data breach or another way that customer data was mishandled, and it was private data that was ended up made public, or at least somehow fell into the wrong hands. And that's just something we really is a hot topic today, and we really need to kind of work on. I know for me personally, I use a service called Credit Karma to monitor my credit score, and they have a monitoring system involved with that. And just this past week, I received an email letting me know that yet another one of my passwords, luckily it was an old password, but yet another one of my passwords was found in a data breach that had been uploaded to the web. And so it's just a very present topic right now. And so today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the user management options that we have available in the CRM, and specifically show you how you can use those to then better secure your company's information, your customers' information, and your users' information. So let's start things off with a scenario. So we're going to be talking about Ron today. And Ron owns a company. He's the CEO and owner of a company called Brooks Bikes. And what they do is they make and sell custom bicycles. So Ron has a couple of different users that actually interact with the sales process, and they all each have different roles in the company. So he has the junior salesman, and these junior sales, he wants to allow them to only access the records that they need. And so he wants them only to have access to their own records, in fact, because he doesn't want them to be looking at all the other information that's in the CRM, and he wants them to be focused on what they're doing and not being distracted by anything else that's in the CRM. He also has senior salesmen, and the senior salesmen, they collaborate a little bit more, and so he wants them to be able to access each other's records and be able to collaborate in that and pass records between each other, and they have a little bit more access to the information as well. He also has a sales manager, and he wants that sales manager to have access to all of the records for his salespeople so that they can all, he can make sure that they're all doing what they need to be doing, he can stay up to date on what's happening with the different clients or the different leads, and just so that he can be able to kind of manage all of that. He also wants all of his users to only have the permissions they need to perform their job. He doesn't want them to be overly restricted so that they're not able to do their job functions effectively, but he also doesn't want to give them so much permission in the CRM that they're able to make any unnecessary or unauthorized changes to the CRM's data or the CRM's settings. So he's going to be able to accomplish this in CRM by setting up roles and profiles. Now, roles and profiles are two attributes that every single user account in CRM is going to have. Roles are what control what records a user can view. They control what they can see in the CRM whenever they go to a specific module. And profiles control what a user is able to do, what permissions they have within the CRM. An easy way to remember this, because they do get kind of confusing sometimes between which is which. Roles control what records you can view, and profiles control what permissions a user has. So roles, records, profiles, permissions. Let me go ahead and show you kind of how this looks, and we're going to go actually set a new role and a new profile for Ron's junior salesman. All right, so we're in Ron's CRM, and we're going to go ahead and go first of all over to the setup page. And on the setup page, we're going to then go underneath users control, and we're going to go to the security control section. I'm actually going to go and start with roles. And so on this page, you're going to be able to see the role hierarchy. And this is what controls what users can see in the CRM. So you can see at the top we have Brooks Bikes, that's the name of the organization. Underneath that we have the top level role, which by default is named CEO. And one important thing to note, there's actually a couple of interesting things about the CEO role. First thing is the user that signs up for the CRM is by default going to be labeled as the CEO, and they're going to have this CEO role. And what this allows them to do is allows them to see all of the data in the CRM. The CEO role by default, and this isn't able to be changed, has access to all of the data in the CRM. So any users that are on this top level role are going to have access to, again, all of the data. So you want to be careful whenever you're handing out this role so it's only to the people who need to have that level of access. Then underneath that we have the sales marketing director, sales manager, senior salesman. We also have over here the IT director and the support team. And so we kind of have a couple of different branches on this hierarchy. The way that this is going to kind of manage the data flow is that each person who is in a role, they're able to see by default the records of any users in a role that's downstream from them. So by that logic, the sales and marketing director is able to see the sales manager, senior sales, and marketing manager records, but he's not able to see the IT director's records because IT director is parallel to the sales and marketing director. And so within a role, there's a setting that I'll show you in just a little bit that you can actually set called share data with peers, and that's going to allow users within the same role to be able to view each other's records. So let's go ahead and hop into creating a new role for our junior salesman. So to do that, we're going to click on the new role button up here at the top, and we're going to go ahead and give it a role name. So let's say we're going to name this one Junior Sales. The next thing we get to choose is who this is going to report to. And so this is choosing who in the hierarchy tree is going to be directly above this role. And whenever we click on the button to actually choose the role, it's actually going to show you a small version of the hierarchy tree, so you can go and then choose very easily, and you can see and visualize where you want this to land. So we're going to click on the sales manager, because we want them to be right next to the senior salesman. Here's the share data with peers option that I was talking about. We're going to go ahead and leave this one unchecked for our junior salesman, because if you remember and look back to, or think back to the scenario, Ron wants his junior salesmen to only see their own records. He wants them to be focused. He doesn't want them to get distracted or just have access to data that they don't need. And so we're going to leave that one unchecked. And you can also enter a description for each role as well. Whenever we click Save, it's going to take us to the role details page. Now, every single role is going to have a details page. You can select, reach this page just by clicking on the role name within the role hierarchy on that page that we just left. I'll show you that again in just a second. But what you have on this page is, first of all, the details of the role. So you have the different settings that we just set up, but then you can also see the users that are associated with this role. So this is a good, quick way to make sure that you have the proper users associated with a role within the system, just by going in and looking at the associated users to that role. And so if we go back to the roles list, I'm going to go ahead and show you our senior salesman profile, because this one, we can already have a couple of associated users. And then also you can see that we have the share data with peers option checked already. And this is because if you, again, think back to the scenario, Ron wanted his senior salesman to be able to collaborate, so they're going to have access to each other's records. And if we go back to the roles list, the third thing that he wanted to make sure was for the sales manager that they would be able to see all the salespeople's records. And since the junior sales and senior sales are below the senior manager on the role hierarchy tree, he's already going to be able to see those records. And so that's already set up. We don't need to change anything there. So let's move over to create a profile. And whenever you look at the profiles, you're going to have two profiles that are in your CRM by default. And that's going to be the administrative profile and then the standard profile. And a couple of interesting notes about the administrative profile, it does have a couple of special traits, and that's going to be specific to this built-in administrative profile. Even if you were to clone this profile and it has all the same permissions, if it's not this built-in administrative profile, it's not going to have these special traits. And so first thing is that user that signs up for the CRM, they're also going to be, by default, an administrator. And so they're going to be the administrator, and they're also going to be CEO whenever they sign up for the CRM. The other thing that the administrator is able to do that no one else is able to do is they're the ones who are able to edit the company details. So this is very important because these are going to be the details and other settings that are organization-wide for the CRM. This is going to be things like the company name, the company's business hours, the fiscal year, the currency that you use, things of that nature. And so only people who are in the administrator profile can do that. The other thing that administrators are able to do is they're able to start trials. Now this is very important because if you have multiple users who have this administrator profile, one of them might start a trial for, say, CRM Plus or one of the other CRM additions. And if they start that trial, then they're then going to be, because they're the ones who signed up for that trial, they're going to be the primary user on that account, the super admin, and they're going to be the only ones who are able to cancel that trial. So that's just a note so that you know users that have this administrator profile, you need to make sure that they're ones who are able to have these permissions and you're okay with having that ability. Because if it's someone who doesn't know what they're doing and accidentally starts a trial, sometimes that can be a headache for your company. All right, so let's go ahead and start a new profile, and I'll show you kind of the permissions that we have available as options here. So once we click on the new profile button, we're going to go ahead and give it a new name, and we're just going to name this one Junior Sales again. And the second option you have is you can actually clone and start the profile off by cloning a separate profile. So you can clone any of the existing profiles. We can clone administrator, standard, senior sales, or sales manager. Since I've already set senior sales up and we're just going to basically be removing some permissions from that one, I'm going to go ahead and clone the senior sales profile. And you can also enter a profile description. All right, so now that we've created that profile, we have a set of permissions that are available. Now, if you look over here, let me try and zoom in. We have a couple of different options on the left-hand side, and they're going to be set up into some categories and then subcategories. So first we have the module permissions. And these are going to be the permissions for access to different modules and some of the tools that you have available in specific modules. Then we have setup permissions, which are going to be the setup permissions for the CRM. And then you also have extension permissions, which is going to be able to, we're going to be able to use that to set up the permissions for different extensions within the CRM as well. And so if we take a look at the permissions, we're going to start off with the basic permissions. Now this allows you to choose whether or not a user with this profile is able to view a module first of all. And so if you turn off the ability to view the module, that's just going to turn off the entire access to that module. So maybe you might want to do that for certain profiles, like this junior salesman might want to do it for the sales orders and purchase orders. We don't want them to have access at all to those modules because they don't need to interact with those things. The next thing you can do, if you don't want to disable the view entirely, is you can actually click and kind of drill down into some more specific settings on a different module. And you can choose whether they can create records in that module, whether they can edit records in that module, or if they can delete records in that module. And so this is a way for you to maybe give someone some access to view something, but you don't want them to be able to edit it or delete it, and so we can remove that access as well. If you look at the reports module, we also have a couple of special options with reports and analytics. So you can enable or disable their ability to view, manage, or schedule reports and analytics. And so this can be nice if you don't want your users to be able to be making like specific reports or anything. You can just go ahead and disable their ability to manage those, but they can still view the existing reports that are in the system. And if we scroll on down, we can also see that for notes and attachments, you can disable the ability to create, edit, or delete those. And you can also disable or enable the ability to view emails within records. For import-export permissions, and for the rest of these permissions down in the module permissions section, we're able to enable or disable the ability in one specific module or multiple modules or all modules entirely. So you can kind of see this with the import and export. Maybe for our junior salesmen, we want them to be able to import into the leads page. We don't want them to be able to import records into contacts, accounts, or deals. And so we can select those modules specifically for this tool. And maybe for our junior salesmen, we don't want them to be able to export the data at all, because we know that once if we enable exporting the data, once the data is out of the system and into a spreadsheet, we don't have any control over it anymore. And so we want to make sure that that data stays in the CRM. So we're going to disable the exporting data section there. We also have some permissions for emails, for the different tools like mass updating or mass deleting. And again, all of these are enabled or disabled for specific modules or all together. When we get down to the setup permissions, these are going to be the permissions, like I said, for setting up the entire settings for the organization. And so you can enable or disable things like user management, module customization, whether they can manage the portals that you might have, the email and chat settings. You can even choose whether or not they can manage and create templates for different emails, inventory templates, or mail merge templates. You also disable the automation management feature, so they can't edit your blueprints or your workflow rules or things of that nature that you really don't want people who don't know what they're doing to be able to mess with. And you can also do that and enable or disable options for web forms, and then data administration, and so on. And whenever you get down to the extension permissions, like I said earlier, this is basically just enabling or disabling their ability to use these specific extensions in CRM. One of the things I do want to draw attention to here, though, is you can enable or disable the options to use the plugins for Microsoft Outlook, the plugin for Microsoft Word, and the CRM mobile apps access. So say you don't want your users to be able to access the CRM in the CRM mobile app, you can actually disable that on a profile basis here in the permissions setup. All right, so now we've got this profile set up and we have the role set up. Let's go ahead and assign this to one of our junior salesmen. So we're going to go over to the users section here, and we're going to go ahead and choose Ben. So Ben currently is a senior salesman, but we're going to go ahead and choose and put him down onto a junior salesman. So we're going to do this by going to his user profile and then editing it. And we're going to choose the role, and we can choose junior sales from the list there. And we're going to choose the profile, and we're also going to choose junior sales there as well. All right, so now we've saved that. I do have Ben signed in over here. And so we're going to go over to Ben's profile, and we're going to see what he's able to view in the CRM, just to make sure that our settings got integrated properly. All right, so we're going to go over to the leads page. And you'll see, at least right now, he's able to see 361 leads. All right, well, if we go to contacts, we can see, at least in contacts now, he's only able to see the contacts that are owned by Ben. So he's not able to see any other contacts in the system. And the same would be true if we go to look at accounts or deals or activities, everything in the CRM, because of the way that the visibility is set up through that role hierarchy, he's only able to see his own records. And so that's exactly what we want it to be like. So now if we go to, say, try and export some records, because we want to test the permissions as well, let's try and export, say, the leads module. We're going to try and export. It's going to ask us if we're sure. And it's actually going to give us an error message because we don't have sufficient permissions to perform this operation. So that's blocking him from being able to do that. And so that means that that was set up properly. All right, so as a review, using roles and profiles allows you to easily control what data each user has access to in the CRM. So let's check back in with our scenario here. So Ron has been using this for a few days, and he's found that it's solved most of his problems. But he has actually realized that there's a couple things that need to be tweaked a little bit. Specifically, some users are trying to perform their job operations, but they're not able to access all of the data that they actually end up needing due to some of the collaboration that happens. So he wants to enable all accounts and contacts to be visible to every single user. He also, the junior salesmen are able to see the senior salesman data, and they're able to view it, and that the senior sales are able to view and edit the junior sales data for leads and deals. And this is just to allow the collaboration to occur. Maybe the senior salesmen are going to be taking over some of those records or helping out the junior salesmen with those records, and so they need that access that they don't currently have. We're going to be able to accomplish this with data sharing settings. So data sharing settings, they allow us to set some specific things. And so just a little bit of review. Roles set up, like we just went over, they set up the general rules for the data sharing through that role hierarchy. But then data sharing settings, they allow you to set more specific rules within a module or within a group of users. So you can set up default sharing permissions per module, or you can set up sharing rules for specific roles or groups of users. All right, so let me go ahead and show you what this is going to look like. We are back in Ron's account. We're going to go back over to Setup, and we're going to go back over to the security control section underneath users and control. So there's a tab over here, it's the next tab over, called data sharing settings, and that's where we're going to camp out right now. So you can see on this page, we have a list of, at the very top, we have a list of default organization permissions. So all these are currently set to private, as you can see. And this is basically saying that the data is currently in the CRM going to follow the role hierarchy in terms of how the visibility is set up. So if a user has access to a record based on the role hierarchy, they're able to view it and edit it. If not, then they're not. So what we can do here is we can actually edit the default permissions by clicking on Edit All Default Permissions or clicking on an individual module. And you're going to see that you actually have 3 options for each of the modules in your system. So you can set things to private, which is the default, or you can change things to public read only, which allows every single person in the CRM to view that record, but not necessarily edit the record. And then you have full read, write, delete access that you can also enable publicly as well. And that's going to enable every single user in the CRM to read, write, and delete that record. So for accounts and contacts, we want those to be public read only. So we want them to be visible. We want people to, if someone's calling in, maybe we don't want to duplicate a contact or duplicate an account, or maybe we just want our junior sales and senior sales reps to also have the information that's available in the CRM for those. So we're going to make those public read only. And then we're going to click Save down at the bottom. And so if we go back over to Ben's account over here, we're going to go ahead and go back to the contacts module. Just a minute ago, we saw that we only had about 58 contacts. Now, if you'll see, it is a little bit tiny, so let me go ahead and zoom in. The total count for the contacts he has is now 1,121. So that's a lot more contacts. And if you actually look at the list, we're able to see that he's able to see contacts for Ron, for Leslie, for Ann, and for his other members on the team. But if we do try and go into one of these records, so or just send us, and we want to try and edit something, we're not able to edit any of these fields. And if actually we go back to the list page and we click on the pencil icon to try and edit one of these records, it's going to give us an error saying permission denied because you don't have permission to access that record. That's because we set it to public view only and not public read, write, delete. All right, so let's go back and let's set up some specific rules, because those rules, the default organization permissions, are for the entire module. But say we don't want to make an entire module public, we only want to share records from a specific set of users to another set of users. That's where, if you scroll down, there's a set of sharing rules that are available. And so this is where you can do specific sharing options, where you can share specific records from one account or one profile or role and share them to another group of users. And so I'll show you how that looks. And you do this per module, on a per module basis. So we're going to do this in the leads, first of all. We're going to create a new sharing rule. And we're going to say, whenever you're creating a sharing rule, you have these options whenever you're creating it. So you first select which group of users or who you're sharing the record from. Then you're going to select who you're sharing that to. And then you choose the access type. So the options we have, we can share to a full group. If you have like groups of users set up, you can share to a specific role, or you can share from a role and subordinates. Now what that means is if you think back to the role hierarchy tree, a role and its subordinates are a role and any roles that are below that role in that hierarchy tree. And so we're going to choose roles for this, and then we're going to choose our senior sales, because we're going to do we're sharing from our senior salesman to our junior salesman. So then we're also going to select down here, we're going to select roles again, and we're going to select our junior salesman. All right, then for access type, there's going to be two different options. You can either give read, write, delete access or read-only access. And so since we're sharing from our senior sales to our junior sales, and we only want our junior sales to view these records, we're going to choose read-only. Now the superior is allowed checkbox, what this is doing is it's looking back to the role hierarchy tree, and it's choosing whether or not you want to share these records also with the direct superior of that role that you're sharing these to. It doesn't really matter as much in our situation because both the junior sales and senior sales are they're underneath the sales manager, so underneath the same person, so he already has access to them. But if we were sharing across the tree, if you remember we had the IT director, so if we were sharing to a member of the IT team, and we wanted to enable everyone who is above that specific role to have access as well, this is where we'd be able to select this option and enable that access. So we're going to go ahead and create that sharing role. And then we're also going to go ahead and create a sharing role to share from the junior sales to the senior sales. So again, we're going to choose roles from sharing from, and we're going to choose this time sharing from the junior sales. And we're going to share to the senior sales. And this time we're going to give them read, write, delete access because like I said, we might want our senior sales to either be able to collaborate with the junior sales or maybe take over a record or otherwise just edit some of the information that's on there. So we're going to go ahead and leave that enabled, and we're going to create that rule. And we're also going to go ahead and create one real quick for deals. We're going to create that for, again, the role of senior sales to the role of junior sales. And that's the only one we're going to create right now just for the sake of time. We're going to give them read-only access. Okay, so one more important thing, once you create your sharing rules, if you just go right off and try and test it, you're going to notice that it's not going to work. Because what you need to do, the very important step, in fact it says up here at the top, important notes, whenever you add or delete a sharing rule, so whenever those sharing rules change, you either need to compute, and use this section that's down here, you need to either compute for that specific module, or you can use compute all to compute these rules for all the different modules. And this is what's actually going to share the records across the users. And so we're going to go ahead and click compute all. Then we're going to go back over to Ron's account, and we're going to see the effects of this. So let's go over to our deals section. Earlier we had no deals because we didn't have any deals that were created by Ron. But now you can see over here we have the deal owner on our far right. And we can see the deals that are owned by Ben. We're also able to see ones that are owned by Chris, who's a senior salesman. If we increase the records that we're able to see, we'll be able to see a couple more down here as well. I believe Ann is also a senior salesman. And so now we have access to see these deals, but if we go into one of Chris's deals, we're again not going to be able to edit any of the information. It's all going to be locked. And if we go back to the list page and try and click on that pencil icon to try and edit, again, we still have permission disabled for the editing because we don't have that access. And so that's a way for you to be able to share and kind of pinpoint specific bits of information that you need to share from specific roles from one to another, or specific groups of users as well. All right, so let's go ahead and head back over to our presentation. Brief summary again. So data sharing rules let you set specific rules to share beyond the role hierarchy. So again, the role hierarchy sets up the general rules, and then the data sharing settings allow you to set specific rules within that. So checking back in with our scenario. So Ron has been able to set up things so that on the record level, I guess more on the module level, people are able to see only the information that they need to see. They're not getting anything extra, and they have the permissions they need to be able to perform their jobs. But he's realizing that there's some specific fields within his modules that he needs to be hidden from the salespeople. These might be fields like date of birth that are sensitive information, or it might be something else that is just extraneous information that the salespeople don't need, but then the CRM does need to have that data because it is something that the company needs. And so he needs a way to figure out how to manage that data that's within a single record. He also wants to set up a deals layout for the junior sales team and make sure that that's the only layout that they can use that doesn't have any extraneous fields that they don't need for their deals, since their deal's a little bit more simpler as they're just kind of beginning the deal process. And he doesn't want them to have too much information to have to input or have access to too much information as they're inputting. So he wants to limit them to only be able to use a single layout that he's created. We're going to be able to accomplish this by using our field and layout permissions within the CRM. So field permissions allow you to control the visibility of specific fields within a record. And layout permissions allow you to set up different layouts for use by different profiles. So let me go ahead and show you what I mean by that, because that's a little bit abstract. All right, so let's go back into our settings on Ron's account. And this time, instead of going to security control for our users and control settings, we're actually going to go into customization and go into modules and fields. And this is because these specific permissions are going to be on a module level within a module, really on a record level, I guess. And so we're going to be able to do that from here. So let's go over to our leads, for example, and we have a sales layout already built out. And you'll see that this has a date of birth field here. Let's go ahead and edit the permissions here just to make sure that they are enabled so we can see what that looks like. Okay. Okay, so with those permissions enabled right now, the date of birth field this is the default settings. So date of birth field by default is going to be visible to all users. And so if we refresh the page here and we look on this record, he would be able to see that date of birth field because it is on the layout that he's looking at, that this record is in, and the information is in the record. So I would be able to see the information, or at least see the field, so that the information's see if that information is visible. But if we go over to our settings over here in the module builder, if you click on the three dots and click on set permission, that's where this page shows up. And that's where you can choose whether a profile has access to read and write in that field, but it's only to read only, so it's just visible, or if it's not to be shown at all, just do not even show. And so for our date of birth field, that's not really something that our salespeople need, so we're gonna go ahead and disable that field. We're just going to choose don't show for both our salespeople, and we're going to go and choose read only for our sales manager. Then we'll click save. So what that's going to do is it's going to set it up like it is right now. Basically, once you disable a field from being visible, you're going to make it so that that user is not going to be able to see that field in the CRM, even though the data is still there. And so that's a key thing you can do for specific fields, whether that be a field that has some sort of privacy matter where you don't need that field to be visible to everyone, or if it's just extraneous field that you just don't need that user to have access to because it doesn't deal with what their job entails with. And so the next thing we wanted to do is we wanted to set up a specific layout for our deals page for junior sales. I've already actually created that layout. Like Samir, you just saw with Samir how you can set up different layouts for different use for your different modules. But what you can actually do with a layout is you can restrict the permissions of different users so that they can either see a layout and use a layout or not use that layout. And so how you can do that within a layout once you've created it here is if you click on the settings icon up here at the top and click layout permission, you can choose and add different profiles, and this gives them access to the layout so that they can actually use that layout. So right now we're going to go ahead and give junior sales access to this layout. And once you save, they'll be able to use that layout. Now, we also wanted to go ahead and restrict the layout so that junior sales can use, so that they can only use this layout. And the way you can do this is once you're on this layouts page, if you go over here all the way to the right to layout assignment, you can see the layouts that are assigned to each of your profiles for that module. And so we can go down here and we can see for junior sales, we currently have standard and junior sales. And you can also select what is the default layout for that user profile. So we're going to go ahead and choose the junior sales layout to be default, and you can actually then click on the little X and remove the standard layout. So now our junior salesmen are only going to be able to access the layout that we want them to access. And again, this just allows you to control the data intake for them, but also the data that's visible for them in the deals module, since they're not able to use any other layouts. So to recap, field and layout permissions allow you very specific control over data presented to a user at the record level. So everything else that we've been dealing with before this has been again, just controlling whether the user is able to see a record in its entirety. Field and layout permissions allow you to control what within that record a user is able to view. So we're going to check in one last time with Ron. He does have one more scenario for us. So he's realized that he likes everything that's happening so far, but he does realize that his users are able to access CRM wherever they're at. And he wants to actually limit the CRM's accessibility so it's only used and only be able to be accessed whenever his users are at work on their work devices. And we're going to be able to accomplish this using the allowed IPs feature in CRM. So allowed IPs allow you to restrict locations or devices that a user can access the CRM, and this is going to be based on the IP address. Let me show you what that looks like. Okay, so we're going to go back into the setups page and go back over to security control. We're going to go over to the allowed IPs tab up here. So whenever you click Let's Get Started, it's first going to ask you what user type you want to set this rule for. And so you have the options of all users, You can choose specific users, and so if we choose all users, it's just going to be every user in the system. You can choose specific users and then add specific users to this list. You can choose a group of users if you've added groups into your CRM, and you can also add roles as well. We're going to go ahead and restrict this by specific user for Ben. Actually, let me go over to his and sign him out real quick. Okay, and so we're going to say Ben's going home and he's going to be trying to access it at home. But what we're going to do here is we're actually able to, once we select the users we want to set this rule up for, you can actually choose the, then set the IP that they're going to be allowed to access from. By default, it's always going to include the current IP address of your device. And that's just to prevent you from accidentally locking yourself out if you choose the all users module and then set up an IP that you're not accessing it from. That might lock you out of the system, and depending on which IP you set up, might lock you out permanently. So they always, by default, include the current IP. But since we're setting it for Ben, we're going to go ahead and remove that. Since we don't want him to have access from this IP, we're going to go ahead and set up a new IP for him. And again, we have the current IP that we could select, or we can select a static IP. This will be helpful if your IT admins would know best what you would need to do, but if your users have a static IP for their user devices, whether it's their work laptops or desktops or work phones, you can set the static IPs here, or you can set an IP range if, say, you have a corporate network and need the entire IP range to be available. And you can also give that IP a name. So we're going to give it a static IP here. And we're just going to go ahead and name that Ben's laptop, because we only want him to access it from the laptop, and it's specifically going to be whenever he's at work. Then we're going to go ahead and save that allowed IP here. And so once you have a couple of allowed IPs set up, you can actually see this management page, and you can see the allowed IPs based on the users, based on the groups, and based on the roles that you have set up in the system. And so now let's go back over to Ben, and we're going to say he's at home for whatever reason he's trying to access the CRM. Maybe he wants it for a legitimate reason, maybe it's for a non-legitimate reason, but he's going to try and log in regardless. And you'll see whenever we try to log in, it actually is going to give us an error message. Let me zoom in on that for you guys. It's going to give an error message that says, access is denied from this IP address, please contact your administrator. And so with that, we've blocked him from being able to access it from a place we didn't want him to access it from, or maybe it's a device we didn't want him to access it from. So we can kind of control specifically who is using it and where they're using it from to better enhance the security. So setting up allowed IPs allows you to restrict the locations where users can access the CRM. So that's just another way you can enhance that data security again. All right, so now I'm going to tell you about a couple different features. The first is going to be the audit log. And the audit log is a feature that's in your CRM that displays changes made in the CRM in a timeline fashion. I'm going to go ahead and show you what that looks like. But basically, this is going to be able to be used if something does happen in your CRM and you're trying to figure out who made this change, why did this happen. You can look at the audit log, and that can help you figure out who made the change and maybe be able to trace it back from there. So to get to the audit log, we're going to go back to the setup page. And then underneath data administration, you actually have the audit log here. It's the second to last option. So where you click the audit log, you're going to see here a timestamped timeline that's going to list what happened, who did it, and when that happened. And it's going to be separated by days. And you can also filter this by clicking on the filter option here. So you can filter this for all entities in the CRM, all users, different actions, or different times. And so you can really look into and get down to the specific time. If you knew around when a change is made, you can get down to the specific time and figure out what exactly happened. And that's going to be all using the audit log. All right, the final feature I want to tell you guys about today is actually one that I learned about recently. It's called Zoho Directory. And you can access this by going to directory.zoho.com. And what this is it's an admin panel for your Zoho apps. So Zoho 1 already has an admin panel, and that's going to allow them to kind of track their users and track their apps within Zoho 1. But what Zoho Directory is, it's an admin panel for you if you only use a couple of Zoho apps, if you don't have Zoho 1. So right now we have Desk, CRM, Assist, Work Drive, Creator, Connect, Click, and People available for this right now. So you can add your different apps that you use. You don't have to add any that you don't use, obviously. And you can also add and manage your users for each of the different applications. You can manage the admins into the different applications. You can manage groups of users across your applications. You can even manage the domains. And you can also add security policies to enforce desired password practices. And you can set up two-factor authentication and even set up allowed IPs, similar to what we did for CRM, but you can do that across the Zoho apps that you have available to you. And so for the security policies, you can use the password policy to mandate a strong password. Maybe you have certain requirements that you want to make mandatory. You can enforce and enable two-factor authentication, and force your users to use two-factor authentication, which is just another data security layer. And then you can also, like I said, set up the allowed IPs across the Zoho apps, not just for a specific Zoho app or having to set it up individually for each of your Zoho applications. You can even use an existing Active Directory, if you use an Active Directory, using Zoho Directory Sync. And so Zoho Directory Sync is just an application that you can download that will then sync the user account information that you have in your Active Directory and sync it with the Zoho account of your users. And so that way you can use that Active Directory that you have that's already existing and add that to your Zoho account. All right, thank you guys. That's the end of my presentation.